by such an incredible panel today. The nation is focused this week on the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett, President Trump's nominee for Justice Ginsburg's seat on the United States Supreme Court. The likelihood of a 6-3 conservative majority court has raised questions about the future of many longstanding constitutional rights. One of the rights frequently front and center is the question of the future of Roe v. Wade and reproductive choice. In Maricopa County, Arizona, which includes Phoenix, the fallout of a Barrett confirmation might already be before us. On September 1st, a set of new laws went into effect in Arizona, placing additional legal restrictions on the right to have an abortion. These restrictions include requiring multiple trips to a provider before an abortion may be performed and banning telehealth appointments for abortion services. What's more, these laws create criminal penalties for violations. That's where the county attorney comes in. Because of these criminal penalties, access to reproductive health care in Arizona may be affected by the outcome of the race for county attorney. New polling for Data for Progress released this week indicates that the majority of Maricopa County voters would support a county attorney who pledges to not prosecute women for seeking an abortion. For people interested in reproductive justice, the stakes for this county attorney race are high. To discuss how prosecutors can protect reproductive choice, we're joined by Maricopa County Attorney candidate Julie Gunnagle, Representative Athena Salman, Lola Bovell, Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona, and Meg OConnor, who covers justice issues in Arizona politics for The Appeal. We invited Aleister Delgadillos, the current Maricopa County Attorney, to participate as well, but she chose not to attend. Julie, I'd like to start with you. New polling shows that Maricopa County voters want an elected prosecutor who will pledge to not prosecute women for seeking an abortion. As you know, Aleister Delgadillos is the incumbent Maricopa County attorney, and she's your opponent in this race to be the head prosecutor. In a candidate questionnaire that she filled out this year for the ACLU, Aleister Delgadillos, your opponent, said that she could not make that pledge, citing a, quote, ethical and legal obligation to enforce, unquote, laws criminalizing abortion. Are you able to make that pledge to not prosecute a woman for seeking an abortion?
100%. And it has been part of my platform from day one of this race that the government does not belong in these intimate spaces. And I will never prosecute someone for abortion, or we also have decades old contraceptive rules here in Arizona as well.
So I was a federal prosecutor, and when you understand as a prosecutor, there's a ton of discretion when it comes to enforcing laws and what the priorities are for county's offices and U.S. attorney's offices. How are you thinking about, priorities and discretion when it comes to these decisions, specifically on the laws that are going to be enforced by the next Maricopa County attorney?
Sure. So the way I look at this is there's a reason why we elect prosecutors, and it's so that the public can know where their priorities are. Because you're absolutely right. When it comes to prosecutorial discretion, it's this absolute authority to decide whether and when to bring charges against a person. And the public deserves to know where your prosecutor's priorities are. And it's not this unflinching directive to enforce every nuance of every law. We wouldn't want a prosecutor doing that, which is why I've pledged that the government will never investigate these sorts of crimes, these sorts of issues, and will stay out of people's personal lives.
And you mentioned previously, actually, we've talked a lot about how this is in the news today because of the Supreme Court nomination hearings and everything, but this is not a new issue to you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, this isn't a new issue to me at all. So one of the things that I've had the pleasure of doing in my career is to represent people in all sorts of reproductive justice causes. My law firm gives 500 hours a year towards healthcare providers who want to provide respectful, evidence-based healthcare in jail, towards people who want to have access to the full gamut of reproductive healthcare, towards women who want to birth in a respectful environment free from coercion. Because when we talk about these rights, it's just so important that because there's a continued assault on them from all sides, that people have access to that sort of representation. I'm a mom of 3, and I am terrified of what it would mean for my family to grow up in Arizona not having the same rights that I have during my reproductive lifetime. And I think it's really important that a county attorney stand for those freedoms always, not just 19 days before an election.
Thanks so much for giving the county attorney perspective. I'd like to bring Athena into the conversation. Athena, What can you tell us about these new restrictions on abortion? And what are the kinds of things that are criminalized under them?
So that's a fantastic question. And in my experience as a state representative in Arizona, majority of Arizonans that I've interacted with don't even realize that we have a flat out ban on abortion, that if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, we fall into the category of pre-Roe v. Wade bans. So our bans were actually passed back when we were a territory and then maintained on the books over 100 years later. And so in our state, the law literally says, and it says women, it doesn't say person, it specifically is targeting women. And it says women who solicit from any person, any medicine, drug, or substance, whatever, and takes it, or who submits to an operation, or to the use of any means whatever, with the intent thereby to produce a miscarriage, unless it's necessary to preserve her life, shall be punished by imprisonment. And regardless of whether or not you wanted to terminate your pregnancy, or let's say my mother's circumstance prior to me being born, she had several natural miscarriages. Let's not be fooled by this. Every single early termination of a pregnancy can find itself in the weeds and in the tangles of the criminal justice system with laws like this on the book. This is one of 3 laws that throw people in prison for exercising their reproductive health care. And I think a lot of people in Arizona don't understand the dangers of this, because a lot of folks just don't either remember or just haven't believed that it's possible that we can go back to 1973 in just a heartbeat. And with Amy Coney Barrett, that is where we're at right now.
Thanks for breaking that down, Athena. We've talked a little bit about the new polling that suggests Maricopa voters want a head prosecutor who will pledge not to prosecute a woman for seeking an abortion. Do you personally agree? And what would be your message to Arizona voters?
Absolutely. That's why I personally am supporting Julie Gunnigal, because she's the only candidate in the county prosecutor race, county attorney race, that has consistently pledged from the beginning that if Roe v. Wade falls, if the Supreme Court guts that decision and it comes back to the states, state by state, in Maricopa County, she will not prosecute women for exercising their reproductive freedom. This is discretion that prosecutors have always had. And it's very scary that the current incumbent, the person that Julie's running against, has refused on multiple occasions to make this commitment to women. And so step one, people need to vote. You not only need to vote for president and Congress, because we need the federal government to protect our rights. You need to, if you are in a state, Arizona this year does not have a governor or attorney general that's up for election, but some people watching this do. You need to vote for a governor that's going to protect your reproductive health. You need to vote for an attorney general that, much like the county attorney, who's not going to enforce these laws. You need to vote for your state legislature, the body that I serve, because it was us. It was state representatives and state senators who wrote laws like this to begin with. And we have the power to repeal and replace these laws, repeal the bans and replace them with protections. And then the last step is, quite frankly, at the federal level, we need to expand justice. We need to expand the courts. We need to increase access to justice, and we need to restore balance to the judicial system, so that it is actually reflective of the diversity that makes up the American population.
Thanks so much, Athena. So you mentioned, the state legislature, the state Senate. All eyes are on Arizona right now in this rate in the fall, right? Because there are key races that could flip the state house from red to blue, also the state Senate. What would flipping the legislature mean for protecting a woman's right to choose in Arizona?
So we still have a Republican governor. So for in the short term, it would mean that we would halt and we would stop any further damage, right? The outright abortion bans that Julie Gunnigal has committed to not enforcing, thank goodness for women like me of reproductive age, those are just a small smidgen of the restrictions to access to abortion cares that the conservative majority have put into law, quite frankly, most of them the past decade and a half, like most of them like within the last like 10-year time frame, because the conservative movement, the extreme religious right movement, has been building to this place where they have been stacking the Supreme Court with conservative justices that specifically on the issue of abortion who disregard and don't have respect for the precedent that was set in 1973. And so they've been preparing for a long time, to not only women and their doctors to prison for seeking abortion care, but to make sure that poor women, especially women of color, women who are already in vulnerable circumstances, cannot even access not only abortion care, but just can't access your general realm of life-saving, very crucial reproductive health care to begin with, right? And so we have all those books, all those laws on the books. We have the 24-hour waiting period. We have the hospital admitting privileges. We have laws where public funding can't go to providers that provide abortion. So it very much narrowly restricts those locations that other screenings and healthcare is available. So, and we can change that if we have a better state legislature. We can change that eventually when we have a next gubernatorial election. And one more thing, John, that I want people to understand is when it comes to criminal justice and when it comes to healthcare, some of the strongest proponents or opponents, right, just depending on who you have as your elected official on these issues, for the people or against the people, are county prosecutors, are your county attorneys. Historically in Maricopa County, the county attorney who has been a conservative, who has been a Republican, has often advocated against the rights of people, especially the rights of women. And so we really have an opportunity with Julie Gunnigal, where I can work very closely, and the Democratic caucus and people who want to protect reproductive freedom, we can have an ally with one of the key stakeholders in the second largest prosecuting jurisdiction in the country if we elect someone like Julie Gunnigal to make sure that we are creating laws that protect people, not restrict their rights and freedom.
Thanks so much for educating us on what's at stake in this election, Athena. Lola, I'd like to bring you in. You know, you're an expert in this area. You've been fighting for women's health for a long time. Are you concerned about Roe v. Wade being overturned? And if that happens, what does that mean for Arizona?
So I'm extremely concerned right now if Roe v. Wade were overturned. I think the thing that I want to add to this conversation right now is repealing these criminalization laws. And for example, also having, a Maricopa County attorney that would, vows to not criminalize abortion, even if it is a good law on the books, if Roe v. Wade is overturned. I just want to establish that is the floor, right? That is just kind of the beginning. Roe v. Wade ultimately stated, right, that it protects a woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restriction. That is a right, right? But a right is just something in name if there is no access, right? And so many people in this country don't have access to abortion care if they ultimately need it because of all of these chipping away, like Athena was saying, in terms of all these various different restrictions, right? So we're talking about 24-hour waiting period, right? We're talking about physician-only requirements. We're talking about a telemedicine ban. So all of these various different small restrictions, right? We also need to make sure that the county attorneys in our country ultimately are not going to be prosecuting all of those various, different restrictions as well. And in addition to that, if we're really talking about choice, like true choice, the choice to decide to have a child or not have a child, if we're looking at this truly from a reproductive justice lens, we are talking about a person having the ability to raise a child in a sustainable and safe environment. So this extends far more than just, for example, choice, right? If we're going to really, if a person is really going to decide if they're going to have a child and they want to parent in a safe environment, we're talking about racial justice. We're talking about economic justice. We're talking about environmental justice. So what I would assert here in terms of, how vital prosecutors are, yes, let's repeal draconian laws. Let's make sure we have prosecutors that are not going to actually enforce these archaic laws. Yes, we need to repeal, all these attempts to chip away at access. Yes, we need to ensure access, but the last piece of this is true reproductive freedom, right? So we need to have county attorneys, district attorneys that are going to address systemic racism head on. We need county attorneys that are willing to have the difficult conversations about defunding the police and divesting from the police and actually moving forward, with helping the narrative in terms of let's actually get resources into the most vulnerable communities. So it's crucial in terms of choice, but I would encourage all of us to think beyond just kind of this reproductive rights lens, because individuals are holistic individuals, and we need to look at it, from a reproductive freedom lens, and what people need ultimately to be able to raise children, should they have children, in safe environments.
Thanks so much, Lola. We talk a lot about, systemic racism and police accountability and the role of prosecutors, but elected officials across the board. So I appreciate you naming that. Is there a story that sticks out that would be, that motivates you to do this work? I like you to make it real for a lot of our viewers, because I think a lot of people think about these issues in the abstract.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. So if you are a Black mother right now in Maricopa County, I think there is very much a fear that exists that you cannot raise your children in a safe and secure environment. There is a disproportionate number of individuals, of Black and Brown individuals that are incarcerated in Maricopa. And so the reality is, we need district attorneys. Again, we need a county attorney. And that's why I support Julie Gunnigal in this race wholeheartedly, that is not afraid to talk about systemic racism, that isn't afraid to talk about mass incarceration, that isn't afraid to talk about the disproportionate effect of our criminal justice system on Brown and Black people, right? So we can truly live in a society and in a county that really maintains and truly shows reproductive freedom. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably a pretty solid example in terms of the disproportionate effect on Brown and Black bodies and communities. And that is not unique to Maricopa. That is everywhere, all around the country. So it's important, for reproductive freedom and in this conversation to have district attorneys that are willing to deal with these issues and make sure that we are ensuring public safety for all of our communities.
So for the record, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Athena, which is, do you agree with most Maricopa voters that the next Maricopa County attorney needs to be someone who will pledge not to be a prosecutor, who will pledge not to prosecute a woman who seeks an abortion?
I mean, John, you know what the answer is to this question, right? I mean, that is the floor, as I mentioned before. The floor is not criminalizing these laws that were developed in the early 1900s. And the only candidate that has vowed to do that is Julie Gunnigal, and she's on this call. So those of you that are watching that are in Maricopa County, make sure you're voting for Julie Gunnigal and make sure you're giving to her campaign and volunteering.
Thanks so much, Lola. Meg, I'd like to bring you in. So you've covered the Maricopa County attorney race very closely, and the Maricopa County attorney very closely. How does Aleister Del's position on enforcing these harsh abortion criminalization laws fit into what else you've observed about our office?
Well, Aleister Del has said 3 times that she would continue to enforce laws on the books if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned to criminalize abortion. She's basically kind of scoffed at the idea that could ever happen, and essentially stated that her hands are tied, which isn't true because prosecutorial discretion is a thing. But when I contacted her campaign about an article this week about this very issue, she suddenly changed her mind and said that she wouldn't prosecute women for their healthcare decisions, which I think, as Julie mentioned, was just, or Athena, was just 19 days before the election. And that kind of fits with like what we've seen a lot of from her office. She, in the months leading up to the election, has tried to paint this picture of herself as a reformer, and she has made changes at the county attorney's office. It's like definitely somewhat less harsh than it was under Bill Montgomery, but a lot of these changes are like very superficial. Public defenders who work there have questioned like how far they actually go. She's done things like say that she won't prosecute people for marijuana possession if they can buy a medical marijuana card, which is like, you could just decline to prosecute people for personal possession of marijuana. You don't need to make them buy their way out of prosecution, which is like not only criminalizes poor people. And there are just things like that she'll say that she's reforming on. But then, in June, we asked her about this 71-year sentence that she sought when she was a prosecutor, and whether there was a guy who he was drunk, he caused an accident that injured 4 people, nobody died. She sought a 71-year sentence against him. He ended up getting a 51-year sentence. He's still in prison today. We asked her if she stood by that sentence. She said yes. And she's like looking for an 8-year sentence against a 61-year-old right now for failing to return a rental car on time. And so has made some changes to the office, and she's trying to paint this picture of herself as a reformer, but by and large, her prosecutors and herself are still standing by these disproportionately harsh sentences for the people of Maricopa County.
Thanks, Meg. So we talk a lot about this idea of like who's a reformer. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people are running as reformers in 2020. And so I'd like to unpack that a little bit. And in fact, in this case, Adele has attacked Julie for being a radical and paints herself as a reformer. What do you think about that characterization? Can you give maybe 1 or 2 examples on how you're processing that issue?
I thought it was really interesting when I saw that kind of rebrand that she is putting out there. She's kind of moved both herself and Julie really far to the left of where they both actually stand. I think, she released this ad where some of the voiceover with Julie's distorted face was saying that she wants to put criminals back on the streets, and that is not the platform that she is running on, obviously. And again, Adele is trying to paint herself as a reformer, and Julie is someone who is supporting things that are so far beyond what the voters of Maricopa County want, and that's just not an accurate reflection of what's going on in this race. There are very simple reforms that Adele could make at her office. She could have already done them. She could do them in the future. We've asked her repeatedly if she would do them. That would make a really huge difference to the harsh sentences that people are getting here. She could stop alleging every historical prior. She could stop enforcing Hannah priors. She could stop stacking charges. And we've asked her about all of these things. She has not refused to commit. She's basically said, we're going to keep doing it. And these are things that, this is why you have that 61-year-old with an 8-year sentence for not returning a rental car on time. Because if you bring up every time he had a drug problem in the past, he's going to end up with under Arizona's laws, a really harsh sentence. And those are the kind of things that are reforms that people want. They don't want people to get 8-year sentences for stuff like that. And so to say, to call herself a reformer when she won't do that doesn't make any sense. To call Julie Gunnigal a radical for wanting to do that is also just not in line with reality.
Thanks, Meg. Julie, since this was an attack ad on you, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond with any comments you have. And you've heard everybody else speak, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to respond because, in Arizona, the Republican vocabulary when it comes to attack ads is limited to the single word radical. And it's one of the reasons why I think we need to fully fund public education so that every Arizona student knows how to use a thesaurus, because it's boring and it's unimaginative and it's also untrue. What I'm finding from her positions is straight up extremism. And when you're asked 3 different times whether or not you'll enforce these bans, and you respond, absolutely, yes, I will prosecute them. And then 19 days before an election, and no, she didn't say that she wouldn't prosecute abortion. She said that she wouldn't prosecute people for their healthcare decisions. And I'd also note what that tends to be code for here on the ground in Arizona, because in Arizona, Republicans don't view abortion as part of a healthcare decision. They don't view that as part of the full gamut of reproductive rights that every person is entitled to. So even if it is a flip-flop, it's not a very good flip-flop, because we all know what that language means, and we all know what's at stake if we have a county attorney who is dead set on criminalizing abortion, and to go one step further, criminalizing contraceptives. because here in our state, we have a eons old rule that makes criminal misdemeanor for anyone who prescribes or even advertises contraceptives. And that's all forms of contraceptives, barrier, hormonal, et cetera. And we need someone who's able to say, that's not justice. And a prosecutor's first commandment is that you never act and prosecute people when it's not in the interest of justice.
Thanks, Julie. So I'd like to open it up to a panel. I'll keep with you because you're waiting for county attorney. And this is related to what happened on Wednesday, which is 64 elected prosecutors in collaboration with Fair and Just Prosecution issued a joint statement affirming that they will not prosecute abortion decisions, even if the protections of Roe v. Wade are eroded or overturned. So Maricopa County, we're here again. It's the fourth most populous county in America. It's a county where 51% of Republican voters want their elected prosecutor to make this pledge. Julie, we've talked a little bit about prosecutorial discretion, and Lola touched on this. What other laws do you believe prosecutors should exercise their discretion in not enforcing?
Sure, we need to rethink whether or not prosecutors should be charging or enforcing most of our low-level nonviolent offenses here in the county. We've seen that when people start acting with the interests of justice in mind, when they start evaluating crimes for whether or not there's actual harm to the community, when they start considering that the taxpayer pays for all of this so-called justice, that what we're doing is disproportionately criminalizing our most marginalized. And let's be real, in Arizona, it's our Black and brown Arizonans. So we need to have someone who has their eye on that. And we also need to have someone who's committed to not prosecuting any low-level cannabis crime.
Thanks, Julie. And again, I just want to remind our viewers, we invited Aleister Delgadillos to join us. She's the incumbent. We invited her to come on the show today, and she wasn't able to join us. Lola, I'd like to come back to you. You weighed in on this. So do you have any additional comments with respect to prosecutorial discretion?
Yes, I have one additional thing that really is a strong point, and it's really how the criminal justice system ultimately impacts our immigrant communities. So if we're really, again, looking at reproductive freedom for everyone, including our immigrant communities in Arizona, then we also need, prosecutors generally across the country and here in Maricopa as well, that are thinking about what are the collateral consequences of plea deals, right, of criminal convictions, and really using their discretion thoughtfully to try and avoid triggering removal proceedings and deportation proceedings. So, I think that is one area we haven't touched on here in this conversation, and I think that's another level of how we can.
Thanks, Lola. Athena. Sorry, you're not on my screen. I'm looking for you. Athena, do you want to address that question about prosecutorial discretion?
Absolutely, absolutely. And from what I've seen, even before I got elected, I originally got elected in 2016. The Arizona revised statutes, Arizona laws were very much written, I would almost say, by prosecutors and given to legislators, because it definitely feels that way. We're one of the few states who maintains the truth in sentencing laws, the mandatory minimum schemes, and a lot of the way that our state's criminal justice system is designed is the only person in the justice process that has discretion, not only of what charges to bring, what laws to enforce against an individual, but even whether to do it at state court, at the federal level, which court system to go to. That all lies in the hands of the prosecutor. Judges in Arizona have their hands really tied because of the lack of reforms, and even like gosh, I want to say it was either 2018 or 2019. It was mentioned, I think Meg mentioned the Hannah Priors and the fact that you can stack previous convictions to enhance a totally separate, different crime that someone committed. We actually passed a bill that miraculously got through both chambers. Again, we're still a conservative majority state, and unfortunately, we're one of the conservative majority states that have been very backwards on reform. And so this bill was reforming and really restricting Hannah priors. It got to the governor's desk, and what did the prosecutors do, including Maricopa County? They lobbied the governor, and they got that bill vetoed. So it's not only discretion in how they enforce the law. There's a lot of discretion with prosecutors in terms of how they engage and interact with the legislature, with the body that actually writes the laws that they are then in turn supposed to enforce. And we need more prosecutors. We need more attorneys at the county level. If you're in a state that calls them district attorneys, then at the district level, who are thinking with the reform mindset and thinking, okay, this law doesn't provide justice. This is just, archaic or unnecessary. And we need to start rewriting these laws, these statutes, so they're designed in such a way that protects the public and not causes disproportionate harm to already vulnerable, already marginalized communities.
Thanks so much, Athena. Meg, I'd like to ask you a slightly modified question. You've been focusing on these issues for a long time. What should Arizona voters have on their radar in terms of issues to pay attention to in the next, 19 days?
Well, besides the county attorney's race, which is huge, there are, I think, as maybe Athena or someone mentioned before, like a handful of state legislature races that are really competitive that could end up flipping the House and possibly even the Senate. And the ballot initiative, Prop 207, to legalize recreational marijuana would be really huge. It would allow for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana and allow for a couple of other things, possession of a small amount of concentrates and the ability to grow, I think, maybe 6 plants, I might be wrong, in your home. And it would also create a pathway for expungement for people who, Arizona is the only state in the country that possession of any amount of marijuana is a felony, which is just nuts. So if Prop 207 passes, a lot of people could have the ability to not only be criminalized in the future, but also clear the criminal record that has saddled them with the collateral consequences of making it more difficult to find jobs and housing and, get healthcare from the jobs that they can't get. So that would be a really big deal as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Meg. So we are at time. I have so many more questions for you all, but I know you have a lot of work to do and campaigning to do. Some of you. But I really appreciate you taking the time. You've been educating me, you've been educating our viewers. And this is really important. We're talking about women's health and reproductive choice. And, this is a huge issue across the country. So really appreciate it. For our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us. Full episodes of The Briefing are available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow Appeal News on Facebook and The Appeal on Twitter for the latest news.